Hello, everyone, and welcome. So many people here, which is great. And I think we should just start by saying that without the contribution of David Griffiths, this would not be happening. He started this group, but I think it's only fair to point out that while the inspirational leadership came from David, Susie did do a lot of the work. He made a lot of contributions to this village. He will really be missed, and we are very grateful for what he did. And I was going to say, let's have a round of applause, but we already have. So thank you very much for that. And I think before we kick off, you're going to say a few words? No, you're not. Okay, all right. I misunderstood. Right, well, let's get on to...
That's not like you, Mark.
Let's get on to Sean King, who has worked in high finance, and it's taken him all over the world. It's taken him to... the presence of some very astute and clever traders. I went to one of the events they had in Florida, and it was a pretty astonishing meeting of extremely clever people. And he's going to talk about capitalism and its limits and what can be done to make it work better. Now then, it's only fair to say he is not a spokesman for global capitalism, and he's not here to defend capitalism, but he is here to talk about the way it works in a way that it may be able to work better. And I mean, it's also worth saying, I think, that we have in the area, a very responsible employer, Timpson's, who do amazing things with the way they run their business, but they are the exception rather than the rule. And so we'll learn a bit more about why they're the exception and why maybe there are ways of making it more commonplace to conduct your business like that. So Sean will speak for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion afterwards. So, over to you.
Thank you. It's always good to start with a round of applause and it's downhill from there. When I started doing the preparation for this, and I think a lot of you, thank you for the contributions you made. You should talk about this, you should have this, etc. And I realised we probably created a whole raft of issues that you could talk about at this time ago. So I had to narrow things down. And I then started doing a lot of research. And as you mentioned, Timpson's, I think there are a number of firms that have been doing good, and there are firms that will be doing good. So a couple of things out was, the co-op, that's a responsible bank because of their advertising, where they invest, etc. Porsche have gone against everything they said, and they're going to release an electric 911, because they felt the pressure of society. And even in the village, you can get a low carbon ice cream. Who are they? So it's such a broad topic, but as I started doing all this preparation, I realised I've only got 25 minutes. I'm going back to the original request from the man with all the hats, David, and we spent a morning talking about how do we discuss ESG and investing, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. But what I started off, was just sort of set the scene. And yes, as Owen said, despite my lack of grey hairs, I spent 37 years working in finance. I was never a trader, so I don't have any red braces. My last firm hired me about 15 years ago as the head of HR, and then for the last 6 years, I was the CEO. And the aim behind that was about bringing management structures into the world of finance. As you get put into that sort of position of leadership, as with anyone within banking and finance, you're regulated, you have to be approved by the Financial Conduct Authority, and you take with you liability. And in the summer, I resigned, and the liability is with me for the next 7 years. So I'm still a little bit nervous about that. So there's many definitions of capitalism, from running an ice cream shop to the whole world of the financial system. And we need to narrow that down. So from my experience, what we're looking at is the financial markets, the flow of capital into enterprise. And I'm probably going to merge that a little bit with big business as you go along. And I think, as you'll see, that flow of capital can both be a positive and a negative. Now, looking around, I don't know what to do here. Most of you know me, I'm a bit of an optimist, but it's starting to wear a little bit thin. If you read the news, the doomsday clock has been moved closer to midnight than it's ever been last week. And the number of drivers behind that it was the climate emergency, war, cost of living issue. So we can't get all of these issues into capitalism and how we're going to sort it out. But I'm going to concentrate on linking responsible capitalism with climate change on the hope that some of the things we talk about... Sorry,
Doomsday clock is fading in and out.
Yes,
it's not a good thing we're about to talk. So what I wanted to do was, take the climate emergency, link it to responsible capitalism, and then we can take some of the learnings of that and apply it in other elements of ESG, which I'm going to define shortly. And hopefully, if I start with doom and gloom, and I wasn't at the Dad's Army relevance here, they were all doomed. At least throughout the evening, the only thing we can do is go up. And so the aim of today, whilst talking about capitalism and becoming responsible, what I want to do is to show that there is, despite the doom and gloom and where the clock is, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. And then I'm going to turn it on you guys as to what is it that you can do to increase that brightness of that light at the end of the tunnel. Because it's not all down to the capitalists. To mix my metaphors, it's not going to be a silver bullet, but actually hopefully it provokes some discussion. Now, there's lots of stuff written about climate change, the emergency, the scale of it. But I think when you start thinking about how you move into that solution, there's three key areas that should address it. The government, and I remember having a conversation with someone in this audience yesterday about how do we get government to step up and take control of things. Secondly, us, the people, and thirdly, the markets and business. Now, it's a long way to go, and I think all three of these elements are somewhat flawed. If you take government, for instance, and we may talk about this a little bit later, governments often have a very short-term view. The election cycle hinders that cross-party long-term planning, because the minute you've been elected, you start to think about what do I do to get re-elected. And when you think about some of the challenges of climate change, a lot of the decisions that are made are unpopular, and unpopular governments don't get re-elected. Now, you can imagine my uproar when I found out in 2017 that the government were banning high-powered vacuum cleaners to get away from the inefficiency of those vacuum cleaners. And what happened is that was an environmental move. We're going to ban these inefficient vacuum cleaners. And what happened when they announced this ban? Everybody went out and bought a high-powered vacuum cleaner, whether they needed one or not. Unpopular decisions don't get you re-elected. I think interesting when you think about the sort of cross-party work, and maybe it's just because I'm becoming grey-haired and old, and I really seem to remember governments where they did have members of the opposition, within the cabinet or within government. You don't see that at the moment. You look at the transition from the Republicans to the Democrats in the US 2 years ago, or even at the end of last year when you saw the transition in Brazil. Neither incumbent accepted the result openly, and neither incumbent even went to the inauguration ceremony of the other. How do you build on that antagonism between governments? So when you look at how we change things, I think there's some challenges around how governments will tackle climate change, whether it's unpopular or that ability to work together. And I think probably this is another topic that we'll think what's not about how you fix the government. But it's all bad news. Things are happening. So the UK government created the Office of Environmental Protection. You all know about this. The aim of it is about holding government and public bodies accountable for sustainability and improving the environment. In fact, last week they released their first report on 32 environmental issues. 9 of them are improving, 11 of them are static, 8 are deteriorating, and 4 haven't got enough data to make it work out. So we've set up this group, and the government are thinking about how they hold themselves responsible. And whether the results are good, bad, or indifferent, it goes back to something I've always learned. if you don't measure it, you can't change it. So we're starting to build that change into the environmental protection, the EOP. A lot of press recently about Biden's administration and their Inflation Reduction Act. Has anyone read that? Okay, well, there was a very interesting read, but the key there, Martin, I thought you would. But there was $400 million of subsidies for green industry in that. Imagine that, the country that bought you the V8 pickup truck, putting $400 billion on green subsidies into their inflation rate. Probably unheard of. Big challenge, though. I think everyone's now in uproar. The reason you're reading about it is it's going to have a big impact on trade, because certainly it's not an equal footing. And then finally, and I'm going to refer to this a little bit more often, the UN Environment Programme came up with a financial initiative 3 years ago, which is about how you link finance to the 17 sustainability goals and the Paris Climate Accord. So whilst I'm very sceptical about governments being able to create change, there is action happening. Us, the people, well, we've all made vast steps to be environmentally friendly and tackle climate change. We worry about our food miles, we recycle, and we offset our flights when we escape from Mount or Snyder in the winter. But on a serious note, intentions are fantastic. Looking around here, who signed up to Dry January? It's looking a little bit damp. Moist. So there may be other problems, and I think what happens, and we saw this when the war in Ukraine started, often the environmental concerns are thrown out. So when you're financially pushed, you may not choose that product that's easy to recycle because it's slightly more expensive. You may not buy the more expensive item of food that has a low carbon footprint, or you might not tick the box that you're going to offset your flights when you go on holiday, because it's all very good, but it's easy to do the right thing when you can afford it. And I think the last year has seen that squeeze has pushed some of this stuff off the agenda. So I've got some questions around what government can do. I've got some questions around everyone's intentions around what they can do. So therefore, who can change this? The third element we need to bring in is capitalism. And I said I'm not going to defend it. I did a little bit of reading about this. There's Stephen Hawking did an interesting book which talks about it. Has everyone come across the fight or flight reaction?
Yeah.
So you get a little bit nervous or you feel threatened. Your adrenaline goes up, your blood supply increases, your heart rate, the front of your brain activates because you're getting ready to be able to run or fight. And that's brilliant if you're thinking about fighting off if you've been stalked by a saber-toothed tiger. It's not particularly good if you're in a golf room in January talking about capitalism. But that's how we're wired. That's caveman behaviour. And I think you can take it one step further. Well, Stephen Hawking did anyway. In the same way, you're stuck in that cave. Your job is to protect your family, your small local community. It's not to take the big picture. People talk about why we're addicted to bad news. When you're that caveman, the reason you're addicted to bad news is you want to know where the saber-toothed tiger is. You want to know. Oh, the journalist just really like talking about news and making notes. But you want to understand where the storm's coming from, where it's flooded, etc. So bad news is important. And also, you've got that evil winter coming, so you're going to prepare for tough times. You're going to hoard your supplies, your fuel, food, etc. And that's what we did back in the caveman days. So fast forward to the last couple of years, we're no longer cave dwellers. But if you look at the pandemic, what was the immediate reaction when we saw the announcement of the pandemic? Everyone ran down to Morrison's and bought toilet roll and pasta. We ordered food and supplies. We became addicted to bad news. Every evening we wanted to listen to what Matt Hancock wanted to tell us, a couple of scientists. And we all became experts on R ratios and vaccines, etc. So I think that element of us still being a bit of a caveman or a cave dweller is still there. And I think it has an impact on how we view capitalism. And in fact, some of the more evil capitalists of this world are exactly the same. They are hoarders. They just hoard money and far too much of it. So now we need to get back to the issue at hand. Big industry. It's one of the reasons we're in the situation we are. We spend a lot of time thinking about that, but some would argue, over the time since the Industrial Revolution, we've raised our living standards, we've reduced sickness and death, we've made life much easier. But at the same thing, that all of those things were demanded, and the good old capitalist was there to fill the gap, to provide the things that we demanded, and also the things we didn't want. Come up with products and ideas and things that we didn't want to go over. That supply and demand, two sides of the same coin, have not saved us well. I think if you look at where we are now, and there's a whole list of things that would be miserable about, Jesus, this doomsday thing here. But it's created pollution, obesity, inequality amongst us, a whole lot of issues that have come out. And I think in my greying world, I think they have grown exponentially in my lifetime. The more and more misery is almost seen there. So as I was, you were going to say it, didn't you? But you didn't. As I was going to say, it's the system we have. We're not going to change it. No one's come up with a good alternative. So what we need to do is, we're not going to have the revolution of a new system. What we need to do is evolve and redefine what is capitalism. We talked about Simpsons. There are firms that are already doing this. And I think the list is growing. I would take issue on the fact that there are too few, but it's not a tiny group. I think you look at the ownership structure of how John Lewis approaches things. You look at how Optimus Energy has grown and its in its processes, and how Optimus Energy is not just about flogging you electricity and gas. It's also about what do you do to reduce your consumption as well. Not many businesses look to reduce their demand. And in fact, Mark will give me some hints on this, but I sort of did it. At COP26 this year, the UN's climate envoy, the well-loved ex-Bank of England governor, Mark Carney, went on record as saying the private sector has now surpassed governments in addressing climate change. Now, if you take it as his word as true, it's either great news for businesses and doing the right thing, or as I've said earlier, it might be just a poor reflection of what governments are doing. So, what are we going to do about this? The firms I've listed above is, we talked about Simpsons, Octopus, etc. I think lots of people are doing it. Usually at this point, someone jumps in and says, what about greenwashing? Look, ever the optimist, look, I go on holiday in Los Angeles, I've got to be an optimist. But ever the optimist, and in greenwashing, leads to a sense of thought and a focus on a particular issue. And what is greenwashing today becomes tomorrow's strategy. And it's a one-way street. Once you start to do something, you're going to have to be held accountable for it. Back to that issue again, if you measure it, you can change it. But you can't leave capitalists to do it themselves. As I've said, in the short term, they're all cavemen, they're greedy, and they're going to hoard it. So we need to help redefine it. So how do we redefine it? There's lots of different ways which we could do this, but I think the first thing is the emphasis around profit. And capitalism is all around how you define, how you deliver profit. And I think you start to reward things other than profit. And I was looking for a good quote to go with this, and I couldn't find one. So I'm going to So Gordon Gekko the movie Wall Street, his famous quote was, "Greed is good." He got it wrong. Greed is not good. And I think that's part of our redefinition of it. And I think this, as we start thinking about how we redefine this capitalism, I think there's three levers that we can pull. There's regulation, getting the government to step in and do stuff. There's investor pressure, get the people to jump in. And more importantly, if you're going to talk about capitalism, you have to make it profitable, because it is the core of what it is. So those are the three levers I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about. Think about regulation. I don't know. You can. There's hundreds of regulations out there. Everyone's working on it. Where we've all fondly remembered the regulations around vacuum cleaners. I know I've taken you down that memory lane. More recently, we changed the law on light bulbs. Who here's got a 100-watt bayonet fitting in the lock to them holding on to them? So there's all sorts. Obviously, some knots there. So there's all sorts of legislation going on, whether it's EU, whether it's UK, whether it's global, etc. What I did want to do is just concentrate a little bit on, and I'll jump straight to this. And I realised, I was told there was only 7 people going to turn up. I realised the font's not necessarily great for this, so I'll read on through it. So this is the UN Environment Programme Finance Initiative. This was launched at Glasgow. Actually, it was launched before Glasgow, but they did a lot of work at Glasgow to try and get people to sign up to it. Currently, I think about 41% of the world's assets are signed up to this. And it's 6 principles. Fairly broad. I've talked, it's about aligning the business goals with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is 19, and I'll test you on them later on. But it's about, I was going to say, is it a journey? It's definitely a destination, but it's a route to get to it. So it's about what do you do to continually improve your positive impact? What do you do to make sure that the clients, bearing in mind this is financial services, the clients you work with will achieve net zero by 2050? And it's not just the banks. It's about what do you do to make sure that you're dealing with all stakeholders in society, and we'll talk a little bit about later on. And it's about how you implement that responsible culture. And the reason I talked about liability and 7 years, if you're regulated by the Financial Services Conduct Authority, that liability is 7 years, but it's also about what did you do to set a culture that was right for the UN EPFI. And so whether it's whistleblowing, whether it's about being inclusive, whether it's diversity, whether it's about climate change, whether it's about being responsible during COVID. One of the things that they could take your licensing away was if you were breaching COVID regulations. That didn't happen if you were working in another industry. But it's about holding you to that standard. And I think the final one that really sticks out for me is that you review and report publicly. I go back to my point. You measure it, you can change it. And so we're now holding approximately half of the world's assets to 6 standards that get us to being hopefully net zero by 2050. Not just the banks themselves, but their clients. So this brings in an interesting dilemma. How do they get there? Now, banks and financial institutions only deal with one thing: pricing, whether it's good or bad price. So when you go to buy your, you want to go and fund your business, you go to the bank and you pitch and say, I want to borrow some money, and they'll tell you this is the rate. Now, the bank's sitting there going, geez, we've got to be net zero by 2050. So if someone turns up with a coal-fired power station in Poland saying, will you fund this? Geez, that's not going to help us get to our target. And we're also going to have to report it. So this year we were X, and next year we're going to be Y, and Y will be greater. So, we're now going to be publicly shamed. So what you've now got is, at the current levels, it becomes a pricing issue. So if you want to fund that power station in Poland that's going to use coal, it's going to cost you 3 times the amount than if you were building a solar farm or a wind farm. And the banks have built that system in. However, so I don't really understand this, and anyone can convince me, but we're going to dig a coal mine in Cumbria, yeah? And the rationale behind it is it's, in the short term, as we make this transition from a fossil fuel-based energy economy to a non-fossil fuel-based, it's more efficient to use clean, local, low-mileage coal from Cumbria than that's dug out of the ground in an environmental way, as opposed to the dirty stuff from the other side of the world, which is going to have a bigger carbon footprint, ironically. So you've got a bank that's been now approached to fund it. It's signed up to the UN EPFI, and it's now got, what does it do about funding a power station, a coal mine in Cumbria? So you would have read at the weekend, and I know you all would have, the owners of that mine were complaining that they can't get financing at reasonable rates because the banks are all signed up to the UN EPFI, and it's making it more difficult. The flip side is, and I know you all read this yesterday, Stephen Fry and a whole load of other actors were asking that the banks stop funding fossil fuels now. Two sides of the same coin, a real contradiction. You've signed up to this that by 2050 you're going to do this, you're going to move, you're going to report. But how do you, and I think there's a bit of a challenge about how do we manage this transition? Do we go cold turkey and stop all development? Or do we wean everybody off? What I would like to say is I think the UN EPFI, by having that there, it means at least it's recorded, we measure it, you can change it. But it's just another one of these, as you see as we start to talk about responsible investing, there are very few black and whites. There's a whole load of grey. Well, I call it black and white. But there's a whole load of grey in this. And that contradiction's come out. And as I said, I was right. 41% of the global assets have signed up in the last 3 years. Who knows if their bank is signed up to the UN EPFI? Yeah. Well, so you can go on the UN website.
They're still in business.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's about 170 UK institutions that are signed up to it. The big four are the Co-op, Virgin Money, etc. So all of these banks, so when you go and want to dig out your mine and you go to your bank for funding, don't go to those ones because they'll find it difficult to give you any money. So, we talked about how do we regulate our way out of this, in how we change capitalism. We now need to think about how we invest it. Now, most of us are investors, whether it's through your pension fund, through your bank account, if you're lucky enough, your ISA and your own investments. And I think one of the reasons I was told that we're going to get a return is you all want to talk to an somebody who works in finance, you want some share tips. I might have a tip or two for you. But so we're out, I think about looking at the population, and I don't know whether this is atypical, I won't ask you to put your hands up, about a third of the UK population invests in stocks and shares in the UK, and they own about 13% of the FTSE. So, whilst not a dominant part of the market, they have a loud voice. And when you think about how you invest, I wanted to talk about sustainability and talk about responsible capitalism. There are two ways in which you can do this. And this slide's not going to work with this group in the screen. So I'll talk you through it. I keep talking about ESG, but what do I mean about ESG? ESG is three letters, E, S, and G. E stands for environment. So when you look at a company, that's how does it treat the environment? You can look at things about, the less, how do you, what's their pollution, what's their weight, what's their approach to climate change, how energy efficient, have they got rid of all those 100-watt bulbs and put their little LED ones in there? How do they use natural resources? You can look at how they do that is you can get, a lot of firms have an energy rating, a bit like a house or what have you. You can see how that, you can track it and you can measure it. And you can look at their CO2 emissions, etc. It doesn't cover everything, but it gives you an idea as to how does that business react to the environment. I told you we weren't just going to talk about profit, so it's how they interact with the environment. It's about what do they do about social, the S. That's how do they treat society? What are they about diversity? What are their health and safety controls? How do they feel about their employees? What's their labour standards? Do they pay a minimum salary or do they pay a living wage? A whole lot of things which you can start to measure. And then finally, the governance, G. How accountable are they? What's their corporate behaviour? What's their structure? How much representation on the board from workers from the society? Can someone get Brad a drink? The other that's not involved with the barman. So E, environment. S, social. G, governance. But this is not easy. So what I want you, a lot of you are in groups or tables or whatever. So let's just take 5 or 6 minutes, even less, just to talk about a firm that you know, or a firm that you come across, a place you work, and just think about and just discuss against what's their environmental footprint, how they treat people socially, and what's their governance. And then I'll gather some views afterwards. If you want examples of some companies you might want to think about, I put 3 here, but you can think about others.
Thanks, Sean.
There's a lot of being told. Okay, so I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to allow Brett to get a drink, and everybody else can just talk about a firm they know. I'll go back to environmental, social.
So to be clear, you're looking for firms that do it well and firms that do it badly.
Just a view.
Yeah. All right. Good. And what are you going after that?
I'm going to talk about secondly, is making it is demand for the industry, then profitability.
Okay. Yeah, you're okay. You're on the top end of it. That's fine. It's fine. Yeah, great. They're all talking. So we're going to ask them now to, well... Okay, fine. Good, well done. You're right about Brett, he was desperate. Actually, it's good for this, because we want to sell as many drinks as possible. Oh, brilliant. Is there a box? Let's get one. Do you know better? Yeah. Where is Bobby? I'm good. Got it fine. Well done. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Times radio.
Doing a top witter. They start setting the headlines, the front pages about 9. And then the most of them come out of I was trying, it's only front pages, and I try and think of something to say about every article, because I don't know which ones they're going to... Bobby, do you have a box for the roof fund? Is there a box for the roof fund? A pint jar. Just get a pint glass. And then just hang it around and they can... Or leave it here. Got time. Exactly, that's good. So let's get a tank in here, and then we'll say it's the church, the roof fund. Not the church roof fund, the golf club. Okay, should we get them back in order? Yeah. Hold on. Hello, hello. Hello. Now then, can we? Thank you. Can we just? Sean will now select some lucky contributors who can just tell us what you've been, which companies
Need the microphone. Yeah.
you've identified.
So why don't we start that way and we can work on round.
So put your hand up, I'll bring a microphone over to you. Yes, sir.
Do you want to disclose the name of the firm you were thinking of, or just sort of the fact?
Yes, the NHS. And also farming. And but first of all, the NHS, it hasn't got an environmental gene in its body. I think that's all we can say about it. Farming, likewise, you've only got to walk around, drive around Anglesey and see these huge fields without a single tree. And that's, and of course farmers are encouraged to do that sort of farming practice, which is a tragedy.
And I think one of the things we could talk about when we finish is how the impact of the new payments for doing good. Well, I've got that wrong, so I'm far more forgotten about it. But there is. How do you? Is that part of a government intervention as you redefine what is the profit? So Martin, go on now. I've picked on you a few times. It won't be any of the firms that Martin's chairman of. But
well, I'll tell you about a company called K3 Capital, which is a business services group, and on the S bit, we decided this time last year that we want to get all the staff out exercising and working off all the Christmas pudding and what have you. And we set them a challenge, which was to walk, run, swim, row, cycle, whatever, around the world in 30 days. So the idea was that all their exercise had to be logged. And if they achieved that in the 30 days, we would give £50,000 to charity. We weren't asking them to raise sponsorship or anything. We just wanted to see them out there exercising and doing something about it. And we hit the 25,000 miles on day 29. So it was a close run thing, but it was and it brought people together and teams were built. We recently made a number of acquisitions, so it was a great way of doing some team building. And then we had other companies that are suppliers or customers who also sponsored, and we raised just under £100,000 for charity. And all the donations were chosen by the staff. So it was entirely their project. And I did my little bit for it locally. So you may see me out on the beach most mornings walking my dog with a litter picker. And I collected together all the litter that I picked up over the space of a month. And it was extraordinary, the mountain of stuff that I picked off the beach, just washed in on the tide. So that was doing my little bit for it as well.
Thank you. Now, you've got like a slob. All right, so Mark, do you want to go the other side over there? Just pick someone over there.
Somebody put your hand up, guys.
Have you got
So, John.
I couldn't avoid BAE Systems because Yvonne and I met at what was then called British Aerospace. So I can say they did one good thing, which was they brought us together.
So is that social or governance?
Well, in my case, it's governance. So I do what I'm told. But it's interesting. I suspect life has moved on quite considerably. But when we were there, we built armaments and aeroplanes, all of which I think could be considered fairly environmentally and socially negative. So I can only apologise.
Well, actually, the reason I put it up there, and BAE Systems, and we'll talk a little bit later on about why ESG is important for companies, but for all the work they're supplying bullets to the Ukraine, and is that not doing good? And so the CEO of BA Systems was trying to say, well, hang on a minute, you've got us on the naughty list, and then you ask us to do this. How do we define it? And it's going to come to a little bit about it. Go on, Andy.
Yeah, okay.
No, you just
speak.
Yeah.
We do a lot of work with Airbus, and I have to say that they are very environmentally friendly. We've all the time got targets. You talk about being measured. We're measured all the time. We're audited 2 or 3 times a year. But they've put up on the factories huge solar banks that follow the sun round. They're developing the wing for the future, which is going to be using a lot less fuel, a lot more efficient. So I think a lot of the big corporations, worldwide corporations, are actually doing their bit.
Thank you. Yeah, very good.
One of them, and then we'll...
Yeah.
Can I put it over there?
The man in the green sweater. There we are.
Yeah, Jonathan Thompson. Just tell you a quick story of. I used to work for a company. I was a director of a company called Historic House Hotels, and I had a chairman called Richard Broyd. And Richard Broyd made his money from recruitment companies, and he decided he was going to start a company called Historic House Hotels, which he found Grade 1 listed buildings that needed saving and rescuing. He restored them, brought hoteliers in like myself to run them as luxury country house hotels, and then instead of selling them, he gave them all to the National Trust. So he gave the lot to the National Trust. So that was about 20-odd million quid he gave to the National Trust. So there's an example of somebody who's never really been recognised, but has always done something what he thought was right. He came from nowhere, and he's quite happy to be nowhere.
Thank you.
So just one of the things that occurred to me, Sean, while I was thinking about the naughty capitalist. You aren't the butt of every single crime drama at the moment with the pharmaceutical business.
Yeah.
Which Happy Valley is a pharmacist, isn't it? He's the naughty one. Anyway, I'll put my thing down. Who's next?
Yeah.
The two shake hold, if I don't. Is that what you were saying? Yeah. So I just wanted to pick on a couple of companies here and give you my view, and I think what I will hopefully demonstrate my point. Yeah, I think Tesla. Everyone. We're all supposed to be becoming environmentally friendly. We're all supposed to be green, bioelectric cars, etc. But when you look at it from an ESG perspective, there is some debate about how effective their batteries are, how do you recycle them. I've got a friend of mine who works for BHP Billiton, the mining firm, and they're definitely on the naughty step. And they dig out all their stuff, and then they give it to Elon Musk to build a car out of, and he's on the good step. And so, where do you draw that line? I think, if one of the most evil environmental issues, of our more recent past is Bitcoin and how you mine that. So when you think about from a social perspective, when Elon Musk said, "I'm going to accept Bitcoin to buy your Tesla," and we saw Bitcoin price go through the roof, and then loads of people using server farms in Finland and wherever to try and dig out more Bitcoin to buy their next Tesla, and the price trebled. So whether it's environmental, from a supplier and a worker's point of view, he's just moved his entire operation from California to Texas because the tax rate's cheaper. If you work for Tesla, that's not a great option. So from a social point of view, and yet alone, hopefully no one's here from Tesla. I'll let you make your own decision about the governance structure. But you don't often hear about the board and the workers on the committee. What you hear is what's Elon decided to do. So whilst, from the outside you might say, well, Tesla's a fantastic green company, when you start to apply the E, S and G lens to it, it could be different. And your point about BAE Systems, was it evil, where is it, etc. And then I wanted to provoke a little bit about two sisters. I did do a bit of research on them, when you think about what is ESG, and I'll go into a little bit of detail, I'm not sure they're a firm that, has done an awful lot for the community. And maybe I'm getting daggers here, but the impact on Anglesey of 730 jobs going And when you listen to the CEO be interviewed on TV last night, he's talking about how popular this is. He's not talking about what's his footprint in society. So I've waffled on enough about hopefully that's given you some idea about the breadth of ESG. I think the challenge you've got with it is you can look at a share price and you can say whether it's good or bad. You can't look at a environmental footprint of an organisation or social status or giving away your business or and say that's added X to the bottom line. So it's a difficult thing to measure. And I think that's the challenge we've got about ESG is there was a business that my old firm used to invest in, a Mongolian mine, digging iron out of the ground outside of Ulaanbaatar. Absolutely awful on it. But actually in Mongolia, it was leading edge. It had a creche for the kids, its support for women's rights, for how it treated its workers was a model for everybody else to look at. And so when we were being asked about ESG, how do you present that story? So advice to you is if you're thinking about ESG investing, it's long term. Don't think about it in the short term. And secondly, pick what ESG works for you. If it is about environment, then look at the companies and environment. If it's something about how they're social, their engagement, if they're paying minimum wage, if that's important to you. But actually, there isn't one single answer to what is responsible capitalism or ESG. It's about what works for you. I just want to quickly, I'm waffling on here, so I'll just quickly move on. The second way in which you can start to define it is a business, a charity I know well, which is called Just Capital. Started 2013. Richard Branson, Arianna Huffington, Deepak Chopra, Paul Tudor-Jones all got together and created a thing called Just Capital. What they want to do was define what was just capital, what was responsible capitalism, and they surveyed. Okay, it was in America. They surveyed. I think it was the first year they only surveyed 50,000, and they've increased the number ever since. They came with 5 categories: how you treat your workers, how you treat your community, how you treat your customers, how you treat your shareholders, which is where the profit element comes into it, and how you treat your environment. Interestingly, it was done by a survey of people, most of whom were workers, so they put workers at 44% of the weighting of what makes a good company. But actually, profit was only seen as a subset of item 4, that shareholder, which was 12%. And that's not only when you look at it from a shareholding environment. This is a group of people who not only were, and if you think about the ownership in the 401k market in the US, very deep share ownership, greater than the 33% we see in the UK. And they're still saying that profit is the 5th on the scale. And so every year, Just Capital resurvey, change these weightings, and then apply it to the top 1,000 firms in the US. And they come up with a ranking as to how they have, how do they score on the Just 1,000. And if you're ever bored of an evening, you can go on to Just Capital and look at the companies that fit. And I thought I'd put them in here, but A, they're all American, and B, a lot of them are tech firms, because it is an American survey. At some point, Just Capital will leave those shores, come over here, and we'll start to see that sort of recognition over here. So, so moving rapidly on, I think that the second lever I talked about, so there's one about regulation and standards. The second lever we want to talk about is how do you make this profitable? How do you make this sustainable? And demand for ESG, so PwC did a survey last year, and demand for ESG funds has outstripped supply. What does that really mean? What it means now is that companies will want to be seen as ESG. I referred to why is the CEO of BAE Systems wanting to be seen as ESG? Why? Because it's going to find it easier to get funding. He's going to be invested in, his share price will go up, and therefore so will his bonus. So he's incentivized to be seen as ESG, and therefore it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The one example I give here is the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. You all know about this. It's £1 trillion. The money came from oil out of the North Sea. they have just announced they are not going to invest in hydrocarbons. And at Davos last week, the CEO, who's an interesting guy, a bit of a Renaissance guy, the CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, spoke to all their shareholders and said, all their investing companies, and said, if you want to be us investing in you, you need to up your game on ESG. Why? Because if they move to sell them, their share price falls, the CEO's bonus falls, so hit them where it hurts. So the demand for ESG actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy and actually starts to change how we view the world and actually starts to have an impact on climate change. The final lever is, we talked a little bit about how you give some regulation and structure around it, we talked a little bit about how you create demand, but the final issue is, it's all very nice doing this stuff, and yes, I'm invested in an ESG fund and I'll sleep well at night because I'm feeling a lovely human being. But if it doesn't create a return, then it may be responsible, but it's not capitalism. And you didn't all turn up tonight to talk about responsible bankruptcy. So, and I was talking to one member of this audience yesterday who said, well, I can't really afford to move my portfolio into a sustainable area because I can't afford the cost and the reduction in return. Well, actually, my advice to him is do, because, and I can't give you, it can't be advice because I'm not allowed to give you advice, but yeah. What I would point out, though, is, if you look at the Morningstar ratings, 41 of their 56 ESG funds, almost 75%, outperformed their non-sustainable competitors. The same PwC survey I mentioned earlier, 60% of the portfolio managers who responded to the survey said ESG added to their performance. So, and then the final thing is, if you think about this Just Capital, what Just Capital did was not only rank these companies, they then took the top ones and created a basket of funds, a basket of companies, a fund that was weighted by the size of those firms, and it has just outperformed the Russell 1000 since it was created. So, ESG investment is not about just how you feel comfortable and nice at life, and how it tackles climate change or whatever else you want to do. It's something that will deliver a return. It should deliver a return. And as I said, it's a long-term investment. But as more companies embrace ESG, as more companies are required to be seen as ESG, as we head towards the UN targets of net zero by 2050, those firms will, those investments will become more and more successful. So why would you want to do responsible capitalism? I think the issue is, yes, it's going to change the world, but realistically, it should be profitable and the right thing to do. So think about, what do you do with your pension? Where is your pension invested? Where is the firm you worked at? What have AstraZeneca done? Where are they investing? Are they an ESG investor? Which bank are you with? And where you invest personally. So hopefully, I said at the start, what I want to do is to show you a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and then what you need to do to turn the brightness of that light. And I do have one share tip for you. Having worked in finance all my life, and Ian Palcroft, who actually came up here for a bank holiday weekend, loved the place. He then moved back to Australia. He has a house in Sydney. I don't know why. But he always, this was his financial advice to me, was buy low, sell high.
So thank you very much to Sean for telling us about the incentives that are out there, apparently, for responsible capitalism. So we've got a good half hour, and as ever, let's throw it open for people's comments and questions to Sean, but just comments are fine as well. We've got a microphone here, and we need a few hands to go up in order to get that underway. So has anyone got anything they'd like to ask? Brett.
One other bit, Brett.
This is probably a bit off topic, but you being you, Sean, what do you think is the likelihood of the reserve currency not being the dollar in the next decade or so?
Very small. I think.
I'm thinking sort of the BRICS economies, really.
Sorry, the
BRICS economies.
I think BRICS, which was a brick. Who's the
Brazil.
No, who's the guy that was the
Lord.
the ex-Goldman Sachs guy, Lord
Labour peer.
Yeah. Anyway, he coined it, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and what I need is a worldwide journalist. South Africa. So the emerging economies. And I think at the time he coined it, there was a hell of a lot of growth, and you saw that we have developed markets and then emerging markets. There was a lot of momentum behind what was happening in Brazil, becoming a major exporter. Russia having engaged with capitalism, not necessarily responsible. India, a growing powerhouse, and that creation of that massive middle class and the IT world that we see there. I think, yes, Jim O'Neill, that's the fella. Yeah, Jim O'Neill. I thought he was just doing Sudoku. And so, I think, yes, there was a lot of momentum. I think a lot of that momentum stalled. Whether it be, you can think about Russia. I think the environmental issues that have affected Brazil. I think corruption that's hit South Africa. I think India's still an interesting one, but it's yet to. It's got its own social issues that'll be a challenge. I don't think it'll change the reserve currency, and I think it's interesting. We can go to each one of the BRICS and spend dollars. I thought you were going to go around the dreaded Bitcoin. Would that ever take over? Hopefully not. And then whether it's for one in China, or as to whether that, I think no. I think the world has tied itself to the dollar, almost irrespective of being the US dollar.
Yeah.
David.
Sorry?
Wise.
Hello, I really enjoyed that. You didn't mention something called B Corp, the Benefit Corporation. There are now just over 1,000 firms in Britain who've signed up to that ESG. It's quite an arduous process. 800 questions, 6 months assessment. We're going through it at Anglesey Sea Salt. And I was encouraged to see that a very big firm, Brewdog, have just been thrown out because their S failed.
Yeah.
They weren't looking after their workers. It's a very small logo on food packaging, B Corp, I think.
This brings a whole host of issues about how do you manage this? And I think part of what I wanted to show earlier on was ESG is very difficult to define. Do you rate workers' rights over your carbon footprint and what's important? And it's how do you put a kite mark or a tractor mark that says that you're ESG? And the B Corp is one. It's interesting. Why didn't I mention it? I think twofold. One is as I said earlier on, this is a massive topic, and you can cover everything. But also, I think B Corp is probably now just starting to get traction in the UK. I don't know. Show of hands, who heard of the B Corp standard when they came here tonight?
So that prompts a question. Can I just ask you why you went? Yeah, it's a lot of work. It sounds like it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it really is.
Why did you do that? Is that for profitability, or because you want to do the right thing, or
for all three reasons? Environmentally, we want to be better. Socially, we want our workforce to be thriving and able to pay them the real living wage. And the governance, we've got to change our governing limited company document to say it's not just the shareholders, it's benefiting society as well.
Exactly, but Sean was sort of implying that this is going to, long term, with the big companies anyway, help profitability. But is that how you see it?
Yeah, I'd like to think you can be profitable and good.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I'd say in the future you have to be good to be profitable. Because my idea.
There's one behind you and then one over there. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah, there was I can't remember the name. It's something like the Business Roundtable, which are 192 or so chief execs around the world from the top banks and industrial companies who meet once every 5 years, decided about 2014, I think, to redefine the end result of capitalism away from being shareholder value to being for the benefit of, as well as shareholders, the community, the employees, the customers, etc. And I think they've recently, in 2019, amplified that and clarified it even more, because it's clearly there. Like you are as a banker, for the last decade or so, you couldn't really get a senior meeting with a major corporation unless you could show incredibly strong ESG, environmental, green credentials, and all major corporations are down that road. The difficulty I find is where I guess it comes out of the result of the global financial crisis. Increased regulation on banks and focus on ESG issues have made them very strong on this. And as you point out, government are way behind. I mean, you mentioned before the $400 billion the American government are putting in. I think my old bank, Bank of America alone, is putting in $1.5 trillion by 2030 or something. The corporations, the banks, and everyone are way ahead of governments. And you only look at the police force and what they're doing at the moment in the Met. I mean, there's clearly a completely wrong culture in there, which would not exist in most major corporations that I'm aware of. The world's moved on, I think.
Well, so I think two things I pointed out. It's not for everyone. Bank of America, I think, are number 7 in the just rankings out of the top 1,000 because of the heads now.
Behind the pillar, yeah.
Part of this, this sort of cultural issue. There was a story about 10 years ago, about 6 years ago, about a portfolio manager who had been defrauding the rail system by claiming he was getting on at one station and actually getting on at a station. So it's a bit like, travelling from Rossniger to Chester, but claiming you're getting on at, because no one ever takes a ticket at Rossniger, claiming you're getting on at Rail or something like that. So he bought a season ticket from Rail to Chester, but was realistically getting on it. And after 6 years, he was doing this in the southeast, and after about 6 years, he got caught. And so fined, had to pay the money back. But the standards that are going back to the standards that are required, sort of principles of the press the button. No, I'm going the other way. Anyway, the guy lost his job and had his Financial Conduct Authority registration taken away from him. The same wouldn't have happened if he was working for the police, but maybe for another entity, because that's separation of personal and work.
Yeah.
I've been asked to stand here. I didn't just walk to the front to get attention. I'm also asking a question because women can talk about capitalism too. Sean, I take from your talk that companies that follow ESG ultimately do it because they can be profitable. And the other view of that is that they're just capitalists as capitalists have ever been. They just want to make money, and they found a new and different way to make money. So I don't know that responsible is the right word, but I wonder whether you think that maybe persuading people to do more than that and actually give some of that away to change the nature of profit or do something philanthropical would be the way forward, because I think you might know a bit about philanthropy, and I'd like to hear your view on that.
We'll talk about the REIT fund later. It's interesting, when you talk about ESG, there isn't a defined measurement of philanthropy. I worked for the last 15 years for a firm that gave 4% of its profit away to charity, and did that in a way that very strongly encouraged it, a bit like Martin's firm, and matching and getting people engaged. I cynically actually agree with you, Barbara. I think it's maybe not responsible for capitalism, it's just a redefining of capitalism. I think it's a good version of capitalism, so maybe I've changed it. And maybe the transition of us getting there means you're required to be responsible. It'd be interesting to have you guys come back in a couple of years' time when you filled in your 800 pages and understand. So we'll give it a couple of days, a couple of years to ferment, and then you understand the impact. Look, I think that philanthropy is something we can talk. I think that's part of, as you think about what is capitalism, how do you give back? And part of how you give back is how you use philanthropy. But I haven't included that in my preparation.
Thanks, Sean, for your talk and festival of acronyms. I'm very pleased that in the just capital, the profit motive is ranking in at 4 or 5. That's kind of really positive. And that's why I believe that responsible capitalism, in theory, is here and it works. When it doesn't work is when that profit motive becomes negative. And then I think you've alluded to this in your talk, I know, but then I think it's all hands on deck and it's a fight for survival. And I guess that a lot of the responsible ESG issues then have to go out the window.
Well, I did talk about, I think there's a short-termism, but I think if you can, Two Sisters is a prime example. Profit motive versus what's the social responsibility, and how do you, without the intervention of government, how do you hold a firm accountable? I think throughout history we can all think of, there's been lots of beneficial owners or benevolent owners like Johnny's previous chairman, who have done things out of their own good and done things for the right reasons, and probably unheralded. But I think that's not just I think what ESG and what ESG and maybe what Just is doing is you're trying to legislate for it rather than require that poverty. I don't know if that answered your question about when a firm goes bankrupt, what do you do? But you can still hold yourself up about how do you treat the people in how you let them go, how you help them move to the next transition, how you communicate with them. You can still talk about how you work with the community. You can still have the right governance in a declining business. I don't know, is that what you were trying to do?
I was just not necessarily alluding to bankruptcy. I was just, once the profit goes negative, then I think the attitude to all of those things changes. But in reality, but in theory, it's the whole thing works. Sorry, no, I'm okay now. I'm now finished.
The question I've got is, do you think it would be a good idea for every political party that sits in Parliament could sign up to some sort of ESG?
Well, yes, and I think and maybe that's what we were talking. What I was talking about when I'm going to have to get my initials correct here. When we created the Office of Environmental Protection, is some way of monitoring, presenting, and demonstrating the numbers. You can look on the website and look at those 32 criteria, which includes things like, most of you would have heard of, things about species diversity, etc. So I think there is, but it was only created 18 months ago, so, we've had this challenge for quite some time. And maybe that's the start of what's the ESG. Well, you'd hope that social and governance would be implied. But
can I just ask? Is there anyone here who's worked for a non-profit company? I mean, I learnt just last night Welsh Water is, to my surprise, a non-profit. Is it Morva? and I wonder how well run it is as a result. Is there anyone who's got experience of Welsh Water, of John Lewis, of one of these companies that isn't structured directly around profit? Sadly not. I was quite interested to know what difference that makes to the experience of working for a company and what they do differently, and whether they're less efficient as a result of doing that.
What about the BBC?
That is non-profit and it's not efficient, I can tell you that.
Is the backcloth to this discussion the intergovernmental worldwide obsession with productivity and increase in economic activity, and everything you've said this evening is being held back by that?
Yes. Well, are we? Is this now not a pivotal point where we're starting to get away from that constant pressure? I think we're seeing. Is anyone else going to bail me out on this? I've got a view, but I'm not.
No. I wanted to hear the explanation, but no. I mean, I think was it Susan? I'm not sure I got the right name, but the lady who raised the point about whether Barbara. I don't know where I got Susan from, but the lady who raised the point about whether this is responsible capitalism or whether this is a new way to extract profit is exactly the nail on the head. But I would actually want to inverse it and say that actually that is the kind of thing that we want to do, because really what we're interested in isn't actually like weighing anyone's heart against a feather before they get eaten by whatever. It's not really important how good which individuals are. What's important is that we get the results of like a planet that isn't going to implode, and a social system where everyone has something to gain from being a part of it. And at the end of the day, what capitalists are ultimately it is your job to be responsible for the profit motive going up. And then the issue is, while I do think this ESG stuff is good, and this is definitely the kind of thing that we need to do, because it does change that calculus, so even the most selfish whatever can justify to themselves or whatever to like act in a more responsible way. I'm not one of the arguments against there being any kind of in-system solution to this is that, like, eventually, because all of this can only be telegraphed to investors like ourselves or governments or whatever through so many layers of this measurement and PR and how it gets reported to who, how it gets mediated, and how these decisions at the end of the day get made by us or by the investment funds that we put our money to, like mostly blindly, etc. I'm skeptical that will eventually result in timely, effective change in the right direction, because as you say, Tesla are on the good step, but like in 20 years we're going to be very shocked by the environmental impacts of lithium mining, for example.
You're too optimistic.
I know. Say I come on holiday here every year. Well, look, if you weren't an optimist.
Sure, you've told it all.
Oh, just Andy, can you just wait till we've got the mic? If that's right.
I don't like the mic.
I know, but it's for recording.
Because I have it the wrong way around. You've talked a lot this evening about measurement, and I was always taught you get what you measure. So if you measure people being away from work, that's what you get. If you measure attendance, that's what you get. I'm not sure that governments especially are measuring the right things. And I think that is critical going forward, that as a community, for the social element, we need to measure the right things. That, to me, positive things, and thankfully our kids are a lot more environmentally aware than we ever were. We grew up in a society where it was one of acceptance. And I think our kids now question a lot more than we ever did.
I think it's one over there. Yeah.
Joe. Thanks very much.
Owen, you asked if anyone had any experience of working with organisations that, like John Lewis or whatever. The last 3 years of my working life, I covered the whole of the Northwest, working very much with the cooperative, the head offices in Manchester, social enterprises, community businesses. And what I found during that experience, the commitment is absolutely massive, but the governmental support is very low. And I think it's the government that we need to turn to say, what are you doing about this? Because the communities, and I think it's been shown very much during the COVID period, how the communities come together, but there has to be some government support behind it, and I think Barbara brought that up.
Okay. Yes.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it's Roger.
I just thought of something. I think it was 13% of investment is us lot shares. It just struck me. Are the pension funds? Do they subscribe to ESG and in some way? And if so, how well? Because that would make an enormous difference, wouldn't it? Because they must be. They must be more than half of.
They're a significant.
Half of.
When you look at the, to find the right, go the other way.
Just as a sort of general theory. Right.
I think the interesting bit is why do I know? Why do I know about Mongolian mines? Is in the firm I worked at, our biggest clients were pension funds. And if you think about what's a pension fund, its liabilities are not for next week, next month, next year, but for the next several decades. And they're more concerned about climate change than anybody else because they've got to be paying out, the pension in 2060, 2070, when we're in this post net neutral, net zero environment. So the pension funds are one of the key drivers to us becoming an ESG investor. In fact, in the sector I work in, they were the most significant driver. But at the same time, looking at this group, some of you may be retired. When you get your statement from your pension provider, do you look at their asset allocation, or do you just put it in the bin and move on to the next bit? I would challenge you to look at what are your trustees doing with the money that you've got invested. Your 25% of it is yeah. So you need to have talk to one Norwegian fellow. Most of it's in oil, or it was in oil. So I think Roger, a significant driver, greater than individuals, is the pension fund. Why? Because they need to be around in the future. They have to be sustainable. And they're not going to get into negative.
Okay. Oh, you're trying to get hello, yes.
I would like to just draw attention to the not-for-profit organisations such as the National Health Service and the Civil Service. One looks at the productivity of them, and they are terribly, terribly bad in terms of productivity. That's all I would like to say.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, look, thank you very much indeed. I think Sean has a message about personal responsibility for checking the companies that we're investing in and all the rest of it. And there is a pint glass here for which you have a mission.
Yeah. So I think, when you think about the broader society, when you look at what is profit and what you've achieved and what you've enjoyed this evening, assuming you have, I think there's a social responsibility in all of us about how we add to our community. And our community this evening has a damaged roof, and if Mark was to move one way or the other, they have a roof fund. So, if I could ask, dig deep, give us some money, or repair the roof.
And thank you very much for all your questions and debate. I think for those who've booked a meal, it's happening there. There's bolognese and there's a vegetarian option. Is there a gluten-free as well? So to Sean, who's given us a very good talk, thank you very much indeed. There we are. Nothing hostile.
We're all on the headlock.